Hi, welcome back. This is part 2 of our Micropreemie Journey. Like I said previously, we have quite a long story, and I've been trying to do this for a long time. I haven't really found an outlet that I felt like would be the best for this story, and I've decided that this is the best for me, so I can just tell it personally and that kind of thing again. So I am on, as you can maybe see, like a different day as well for telling this. I hope you guys are encouraged and that this can help someone that's going through this, or if you know someone that's going through this, that you can share this with them. Today is pretty serious, and again, I do talk about anything that may have pertained to the hospital stay, anywhere from birth to surgeries or anything like that. So if that's something that you're sensitive to, just be aware that that might be bothersome to you, but it was part of our story and it's part of our life and our past and things that have happened, so I will be talking about it. So I left off saying that we went to another two hospitals, and so we ended up going to Scottish Rite in Atlanta for her heart surgery. And before we left, our neonatologist for her, one of them, he had said that he wanted to get us to Florida so we could continue getting her better and that kind of thing. And the goal originally was that we would go to Florida, to St. Petersburg, to All Children's. We would go there right after we left Scottish Rite from Atlanta. But that did not happen. We ended up being at Scottish Rite, and then we came back to Macon, and we went to the medical center again, and then from there we did end up going to All Children's, but we'll get into all that story now. We went to Scottish Rite, and she had her surgery, and she did really well, and I have to say that the doctor, even though Macon was making sure we got to get home and everything, the doctor in Atlanta, her cardiologist that she had that did the PDA ligation, he gave us more hope than anyone ever had. He came to us and he said, she did really well with the surgery, and we're so happy with the outcome, and she's doing great, her SATs are much better, all that. And he said, this is what was so encouraging for us. He said, I put her incision along her scapula, along her shoulder blade, so one day when she gets married, if she chooses to, she can wear a strapless wedding dress and no one will even know that she had had a surgery. And I just remember looking at him and saying, you really think that she's gonna do well and she's gonna make it? And he's like, absolutely. I think she's gonna do great. I think she's doing really well, honestly, like so much better than anyone could have ever imagined. And he was just so encouraging with those words, because up until that point it was all about survival, not about the future. And her having a future, or even having the possibility of a typical future. So it was incredible. And I honestly can't thank him enough. And he said he just wanted to know one day that, she'd hear that story and that he would, she'd know that he did that to make sure that she could do that one day. And we have told her that story over and over again because of it. Because it was just such an incredible part. And she did great. Her poor little feet, though, they look like just like ground beef. because they had to do all sorts of blood tests, and they had to use her feet to her blood gases and that kind of thing, and they had to use her feet to do those tests. And she just had like these raw heels and feet, and we just felt so bad for her, and the doctors did and the nurses did, but they did a fantastic job. And we left there, and we ended up going back to Macon. Like I said, we were there, and while we were there, they told us that, a couple weeks later, they told us that we would be going home soon, like at least back to Florida. We took that ambulance ride from Scottish Rites to the Medical Center of Central Georgia, and then while we were there, we find out that that was happening, and we then just had to wait to get word that we were going to be leaving. And we finally got word that we were going to be leaving, and I remember the nurse that we had on duty that night, the night before, she was like, it was a full day before. She said, but it was her last shift with us. She said, I cannot let you leave this hospital without having held your baby yet. Because this is 2 months in, and I've never held her. The closest thing I had was those pictures you saw in the first video with me lifting her up to change her diaper and them to get a weight. And that was it. And so she got me gowned up and ready, and told me that later when I came back after shift change that, that's what was going to happen. So I came back, I got completely scrubbed in again, I gowned up, I got ready to hold her for the first time ever. And I just remember finally holding her, and I remember she joked and said, I said, they're not going to be happy about this. And she said, what are they going to do, yell at me and tell me not to let you do it again until they say it's okay? Because we were leaving, And I said, okay. And I remember the next day I had bought her a 12-inch doll dress, and she had put it on her, and it was a little purple dress, and I know I have pictures somewhere, but I don't know where it is right this second. But I had this little purple dress on, and it had a little purple hat on, and she had her dressed up, and it was Grandparents' Day, and she had that picture waiting for my mom saying, I love you, Grandma and Grandpa, and it was just really, really sweet. And yeah, I finally got to hold her though, and it was only for like 10 minutes, but it was absolutely incredible to finally hold her. And at the same time, it was so scary to finally hold her because, she was still not even 2 pounds yet, and she was still so tiny. She was still only 12 inches long. So that was that part of that journey. I will say I totally forgot to add in, so we always said that when we left Macon, we were gonna throw a party. And so we did. We threw like a little, as much as you could at a hospital, a little party. And we had balloons and cake that we gave to all the nurses and the doctors and everything, and just thanked them, and had some food and that kind of thing. We were just so excited, and they were genuinely very happy for us as well, because we had been with all of them for months, and they all knew the story, and it was just really kind, and they really just were such an amazing support to us. So we finally got to leave, and we went to St. Pete, and we took the ambulance to this tiny, tiny airport in Macon, Georgia, which I never even knew before this that there was a Macon airport, but there is. And we went there, and they did not have what they needed to get her on the plane, but the Children's Miracle Network had gotten, I think the way they worked it was basically they paid for the gas for the plane, and the pilot, I think, volunteered his hours to piloting us, and then the flight team, I'm not sure if the Children's Miracle Network paid for them, or if they went ahead and volunteered their time. I honestly don't remember. I'm so sorry. I know I should remember things like that, but it was 16 years ago and I was going through a whole lot right then. We all were. So I don't remember it for sure. So we got on that plane and we went, and I remember on the way there though, like when we got to the airport, they didn't have any way to get her isolette up in the plane. And so eventually, like, another plane allowed us to use their, like, luggage cart, kind of. It was like a really small one, kind of the size of maybe a 3-step ladder, and it was a luggage cart, kind of like a luggage conveyor belt. And they put her isolette on there, but they had to keep both, they had to keep it even. It couldn't lean. So one person stood on one part, another person was standing at the top, and they had to keep it even. So these like random guys from all over the airport, they came over and they held up the sides as well, and then they finally got her in, and it was quite a sight to see. And I was the only one that was able to go on the plane. My husband and my mom, they drove back to Florida, and I went on the plane with the team. And in the team there was a respiratory technician, a respiratory therapist, we had a nurse, we had the head of the flight team, and we had the pilot, and then myself. And it was only a 5-seater plane, and I sat on what doubled as the toilet, actually. So we got in that plane, and I remember before we left, actually, just jumping back a tiny bit, sorry, I'm bad at that. Before I left, they said, we wrote in the notes that you hadn't been able to hold her yet, and we cannot let you go on this plane without holding her. Do you want to hold her? She's in our care now. They can't say no. And I laughed and I said, you know what? They actually let me hold her. I said, they just let me hold her finally. One of the nurses, she's really big on kangaroo care, and she let me hold her. And they were very happy about it. And they said, well, if you want to again, it's totally fine. And I said, no, I understand. I don't want to give her too much right now. Let's go on a plane and everything. I don't want it to be too much. So we got on the plane, and very, very kind man that was the pilot and everything, and he just really liked to help others. That was his love, as far as being a pilot. So he did some med flights occasionally, and he did one for us. And I remember in the plane, the poor respiratory tech, he had to hand bag her the whole time, because every time he let the machine take over, she would desat really bad, and it was very problematic. So he had to hand bag her the whole time. But during that time, I had I'm sitting next to her for the first, I'm like as close as I had ever really been to her, it felt like. And I'm looking over at the side, and I see this whooshing, I thought it was wind current or something. It was not. I found out later. So we're going, and all of a sudden I hear, and I said, and they look over at me, and they look over at me, and they're completely wide-eyed, and they were like, everything's gonna be okay, but we do have to make an emergency landing because there's a problem with the gas tank. And I said, okay. So we, and I'm just kind of sitting there laughing to myself in my own world, because I'm just like, we just made it through, these impossible odds so many times right now, and here we are, we get on a plane, and we're gonna, maybe we're gonna crash. And I wasn't afraid or anything like that. I mean, not after the time that I'd already had. But, I was just waiting for whatever was going to happen. I'm like, well, at least I get to go with my daughter still. I'm sorry for my husband and my mom when they get to Florida, and that's how they find out that something happened after all this. So we turned back around, we got back to the airport, and I find out that the person that is typically supposed to, at that airport, fill up the tanks, they forgot to put the gas cap back on. So that whooshing color, that air current, I thought it was not that. It was the gas pouring out of the plane. And I didn't know any better, because I had actually only flown 2 more round trips before that. other than that, like, we went all over the United States when I was a kid, and into Canada and Mexico and that kind of thing, a couple other places when we cruised, but I didn't realize it was anything wrong. So I didn't say anything either. I mean, I watched it go out of the plane, but I didn't realize that's what I was doing, because I had not flown since I was like 6 years old at that point, and I was, 22. So, anyways, we all landed safely. We got filled back up, flew to Florida safely, and everybody apologized and excuse me. And everybody went ahead and, they had brought me lunch as well. They had stopped by and gotten some sandwiches, and they brought me some Subway. Everybody got me Subway. It was really sweet. But they got me Subway, and I, ate that with them, and they were all kind of calming down. And I remember a few times I got to hand bag pump the oxygen for Kaylin, because they weren't, like, the way the protocol worked, they couldn't have anybody else do it, but technically I could, because I wasn't a medical professional in that team, so they were able to let me do that for her, so, because I was mom. So I went ahead and I did that, and so the respiratory therapist could just, the poor man, like, he did it for so many hours, especially with having to turn around and stop again. So I did that, and we had to keep our plane at like a weird level the whole time, because if we went to a certain height, she would start desatting really bad as well. So we had to basically be in like a really rough current the entire time. He's handbagging her. It was quite a trip. So we got there, and it definitely bonded us all, though. So I'm very grateful for that. Really quick here, we really bonded, and the flight team came quite frequently to say hello and check on Kaylin, because apparently they were genuinely afraid that we were going to die. I'm not exaggerating when I say this. And so they would come over, and they told me that was the most terrified they have ever been on any flight, and they've done, I think, thousands, they said, of hours in the air. And never have they been that afraid, because they honestly thought they weren't going to make it, that we weren't going to. So we didn't, though. Yay! Go us! And we got to the hospital, and my mom's best friend was there, Barb, and she was the most incredible person that you could ever ask for. She knew how tired we were after all that time and everything we'd been through. And so I am from St. Pete originally, and that's where she lived. And she stayed with Kaylin overnight for us and took care of her, so we could, for a couple months that we were there, because she knew we needed rest, and she insisted. And that was Kaylin's Auntie Barbar time, and she would send us pictures, and she was just so in love with our daughter, and we couldn't be. I know you heard a lot about gratefulness, but honestly, there's just so much gratefulness surrounding this story that I can't convey it enough. So she stayed with our girl in that time, but she was there waiting for me, so I wouldn't be alone. And we got there, and within about an hour and a half, maybe, my husband and my mom got there, because it was a long time that it took for us to get back to Florida because of the plane issues. And we got there, and we got Kaylin set up, and that started our all children's journey then. So we started that, and while we were there, they were fantastic, don't get me wrong, and we did stay at a Ronald McDonald House there in St. Pete. They were great, but it did not have that same, like, home feeling that Macon had provided. which was a little strange. And it was hard because then when we got back, like, my husband had to go back to work, and so I still had my mom because my mom actually worked out of St. Pete at the time. And I still had a good support system because, you know, like I said, I was from there. But, and, you know, just the fact of being in Florida. But you know, it just didn't have that same feel, and it was hard to adjust to that. And, you know, it's hard to not have the comfort that you've come accustomed to. So we were there, and the nurses were fantastic there too, and the doctors were great, of course. And we ended up, you know, she had a good chunk of time before I could hold her then, even because they realized like how much she would get overstimulated if I did. We tried to, and it just didn't work out for a while. And she kept growing stronger and bigger, and I'll have all those pictures in this video as well. Well, not all, but I'll have a bunch of those pictures in this video as well for you to look at. But she got bigger, so we left there and we come to Florida, and and we have these, like, you know, new fantastic doctors and nurses and everything. And in fact, one of them I still get to talk to on social media, and she knows who she is, and she was incredible. And yeah, it was so incredible. One of the coolest stories I guess I have is there's two really funny ones with my grandparents. So I took care of, alongside of my mom, but I took care of my grandparents. My grandpa had 2 forms of cancer, and my grandma had Alzheimer's and dementia. So my grandparents lived with my parents, but I would help get them to doctor's appointments and that kind of thing. And I actually really loved the time, especially, like, well, sometimes it was a little tumultuous with my grandma because she was difficult, but just due to her, you know, diseases. But my grandpa was the sweetest man in the world. He was my best friend. He was everything to me. So he and I loved taking him to things, personally. He came, and so he had to have some treatments to be able to get strong enough to come to see her. But about a week after we were in the hospital, he and my grandma were able to come up and see her at the hospital. And I remember I'm sitting there and I'm filming him. I will find the film someday and I will have it changed and I'll put it out there for people to see, but I don't have it right now. So I'm filming him, and I see him just start laughing. And he's like, you know, and I said, "What are you laughing at?" And he's like, "Look at her, she's smiling, it's so cute, she's smiling at me." And I called him Papa. I said, "Papa, she is not smiling at you. If it's anything, maybe it's like a little bit of like gas or something, but she is not smiling at you. It's the only time I've seen her even sort of smile. You know, it's not gonna happen right now." And he looked at her and he looked at me and he said, "Well, you're wrong." And he said, "That little baby girl was smiling at me. Maybe she just didn't have anything to smile about until I got here." And sure enough, I look over, the nurse looks over, and there she is in the bed, just looking up at him and smiling and making little, like, movements and stuff like that, because she was still intubated, so she couldn't, like, coo or anything. But she's smiling at him. And I remember looking, I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" I'm like, "I have been next to this baby for hours and hours and hours. I have sat at her side, I've talked to her, I've prayed with her, I've sang with her, I've played with her, I've read books to her." I'm like, and you walk in and this kid smiles at you. And he just laughed and laughed and laughed. And whenever he laughed, his belly would, like, go up and down a little bit. And he was so happy with himself that she was smiling at him. The nurse just looked over and she's like, "That baby is totally smiling at him." She is so happy to see her great grandpa. And I just remember how happy I was to see my papa, because I felt bad that I wasn't with them. and I missed them so much. So, the opposite happened when my grandma walked in. So like I said, my grandma had Alzheimer's and dementia. She was a fantastic grandma, okay? But the Alzheimer's and dementia really messed with her. So she walks in. I'm sorry. She walks in and she walks over to Kaylin and she looks at her and she's like, "Oh." And I said, "What?" And she's like, "Oh, that's just so sad." And I said, "What's sad?" She's like, "Well, Shauna, I'm not trying to be mean, but she's just not the cutest little girl." And I was like, "Mama, that's so mean." I said, "You can't say that." And she's like, "Well, it's not that I don't think that she's beautiful. I don't love her, but she's just not very cute." And okay, I understand what she was saying, because when you have a micropreemie, I mean, they're like the sweetest thing in the world, but because of the different oxygen and tubes that they have on them, like their face is literally like pushed in all the time, and she had that going on. So her face was like squished a little like weird and that kind of thing. And of course, you know, their heads look bigger because they're not supposed to be there yet. I mean, there's just a lot of things that are a little odd looking on them. So she wasn't completely wrong, but it was just such a polar opposite of what happened with my grandpa, which is just our life. But yeah, she let me know that she was not the cutest baby ever. And that was the first thing that she said to us. Kayla knows the story, so don't worry, she's not gonna be offended. It was just, oh my. And we laughed because like our family, like, it's not that our heads are huge, but we have big heads for whatever reason, like all four of us. And so like the kids combined, honestly, like Kaylin's head was so big, and when she was in the hospital, like her little feet, they looked so big in comparison to everything else. Like they weren't big, don't get me wrong, but they looked so big in comparison to everything else. So we just kind of laugh, and you know, you gotta know what you gotta know what you can laugh at with yourself, you know. So anyways, Mama came in and that's what she did, because I called her Mama. She came in and that's what she did. And, you know, it's just her. It was just her. Went through that, and they left, and we just watched her continue to grow and heal. And then when she was, one day I remember they took her weight, and we swore also that we'd have a 3-pound party. So they took her weight, and when she was like, she would have been about 3 months old, she finally hit 3 pounds. And I was so excited, and so was my mom, and so was Barb, and my husband was at work, but I called him and I let him know. And we were so excited. So we went out that night because we had shift change, and we would go to eat some and that kind of thing because she was stronger. And we went out that night to the pier, the St. Pete Pier at the time, and we had dinner, and we celebrated, and we brought like a little cake piece back for her, and we let her have like a little tiny bit of the frosting because, you know, you couldn't let her have much right then, but I could let her have tastes of things. So I would just kind of like wipe it on her tongue, and then, you know, that kind of thing. And, you know, we were so happy that she finally hit that 3-pound mark. And, you know, I mean, think about that. Like, it was like, you know, 3 months after she was born. That's crazy. So she finally hit that, and we were very happy. She continued to get better. The one thing that we did have an issue with also, big time, her eyes were having a lot of issues because she'd been on oxygen for so long. So she finally extubated herself. She one day I was literally during shift change. She went and she just grabbed the tube and pulled it right out of her own little mouth. And she was like, nope. They said they walked over, the bells and whistles are going crazy, and there she is with the cord, and just literally as soon as the nurse walked over, she dropped it right next to her. I slept. She's like, it was very dramatic, honestly. But she said, we're leaving her because she's doing well, and we want her off the oxygen. We're going to extubate her in 2 days, but she did it herself today, so we're going to see how it goes. And I said, okay, and she never went back on the ventilator anymore. She did have oxygen still, but she was just on a cannula. She didn't even have CPAP for a couple days, and she had to have CPAP for a little bit, like about I think 4 days. But then she went back to just the cannula and oxygen, and but because she'd been on oxygen for so long, she had vision issues, and her retinas were actually starting to come close to detaching. They weren't there yet when they first started watching, but they were coming close to it. So we knew that was something they had to watch, and they watched it, and it was on a every 3 days, then it turned to every other day, then it turned to every day, and then eventually we found out that she was going to have another surgery, and it was very upsetting just in general to have surgery for your kids, but knowing that this tiny baby was going to have another surgery, she was just bare, she had just hit 3 pounds. We were talking about, in another couple weeks, like hopefully sending her home, and that was obviously going to put a big delay on that, because surgery takes a lot of recovery, especially on a sick kid like her. So we get we're waiting, and we find out that she does have to have the surgery for sure. And basically the doctor said, and he was amazing, by the way, this doctor, and all the eye doctors that she's seen since have said, he did such an amazing job, beautiful job, and he really did. But we had the surgery, and he said, if there's only 2 other things that would stop the surgery from happening first thing in the morning. One would be that they had a traumatic heart condition come in through ER, or 2, there was a traumatic brain condition that came in through the ER that had to be operated on, and the operating room would be taken over. He said, but otherwise, she's the first on the list for anything, because if we don't do this, she's going to be blind for the rest of her life. So, because her retinas at that point were completely detaching. So we, did the surgery. She did great. The risks that were a possibility were like, essentially like lazy eyes. I can't remember the actual correct medical term for that, I'm sorry. And she was going to lose peripheral vision. So for us, peripheral vision is a big deal, right? But for a baby that has never really seen anything, like their brain hasn't needed to adjust to anything else, it wasn't as bad, because first off, she has much more peripheral vision than they ever thought she would. Quite a lot, actually. But there is a limitation to what she has. So where we can see, like when we're looking forward, we can see over here, she can see like just not as easily. So, but she doesn't know any different, so it's not a big deal. Like you and I would have to, anybody else would be walking into walls, we'd be hurting ourselves, we wouldn't be able to drive easily, nothing, because our bodies aren't used to it. Eventually we'd probably acclimate, but it would take a lot longer than her growing into it, just always seeing that way, and her brain only knowing this is how you do it, So they did, and she's done beautifully with that as well. And then they finally talked to us about her coming home day, and we knew that it was coming up, and it was a little closer and a little closer and a little closer, and then we finally got to take her home. and we went and we did a rooming in the hospital. They had a room that you could stay in that synthesized a house, sort of, a bedroom, and you'd sleep in there with the baby, with the child, and just so you knew what to do, because she was still going home on a monitor and she was going home on oxygen, so they have to make sure that you know what you're doing. And then the next day she had to pass the car seat test, and if she passed the car seat test, then she could go home, but if she didn't, then she'd have to stay in longer. So we slept in there, my husband and I, and we were so excited and then nervous, because we'd never taken care of her alone. It never really felt completely like just our baby, because we've always, at that point, we'd always had nurses and doctors around and no time alone with her. So we were in there and we were holding her, and she did a fantastic job, and the only time we saw them is when they brought our meal to us. And we just held her all night long, because we hadn't been able to, and we knew we would once we went home, but this is the first time in the hospital we really got any time alone with her. So we held her and we loved on her, and she did great. The next day we left and we went back to her isolette instead, and we went, we were okay. She did the car seat test and she did great with that, and we left, and I'll have those pictures as well. But we left and she did an incredible job. My husband drove so slow on the way home, it was hilarious. But we got home finally safely, even though he was terrified of hurting her or going too fast or anything. And so we got to the house, and it was about it took a lot longer than it should be, but we're about an hour to an hour and a half south of All Children's, and we got home and they already had the oxygen tank there to hook her up to, and we had portable oxygen tanks too if we went anywhere, and the monitor was portable as well. So we got home, and we actually were living with my parents then, because those were a lot of medical bills and stuff like that, and being out of state, we had a long wait of trying to figure out how insurance would work it out. So we got home, and we were finally just there, and I'll put those pictures in of when, one of my favorite pictures is me and my mom and my daughter and my grandmother, and just having those 4 generations in a picture. It's even more special now, because both of them are no longer here. They're with Jesus, and so those pictures mean even more to us. My grandpa always said he wanted to have 6 months at home with Kaylin from the start of it. He said, I want 6 months at home with this baby. And I said, well, Papa, I don't know if she's even going to make it. And he said, oh, she is, and I'm going to get my 6 months at home with her. And sure as everything, he got his 6 months at home with her. He got 7 months almost. Like I said, he had 2 forms of cancer. Well, it turned out that he ended up getting a 3rd. And when he got the 3rd, it was leukemia. And his body just couldn't take anymore. He couldn't take anymore. He'd been dealing with cancer treatments for many, many years. And he decided it was time, and he let us know. And so we got one more good, time with him. And me and my mom and Kaylin, we sat out in their apartment on my mom and dad's house. And we were there until his final breath, and it was pretty incredible. And he got that time, though. I remember him rallying, and he hadn't been able to move for days because he was just so weak. And he lifted Kaylin up into the air, and he told everybody he wanted us to leave, so we left her with him, and we thought he just wanted to take a nap with her, And he didn't. He wanted to play with her, and he just started lifting her up, and he was throwing her into the air, and he's loving on her. And that was the last like big thing he did until later, but that's a totally different story. But that was the last real big thing he did, and he got that time with her like he wanted, and I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. But yeah, all right. But sorry. Yeah, we finally made it home, and this is all about you, Kaylin, and your coming home day, and your mom's journey in NICU with you. And it was an incredible one. And it's, NICU is, any ICU is not for the faint of the heart. The faint of heart. It's not. It's a roller coaster. It's not a straight line. It's not a race. It's a paced, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, sometimes backwards, sometimes upside down, kind of a ride. And it's not one that many people would ever hope to go on. But now that I have, I'm very grateful to just appreciate every single breath, literally, like every single second, because I will never forget how grateful I was truly for every single second that I kept that baby in, for every single second that she lived. And I continue to be grateful. And it may sound a little strange because she's 16 now, but every single second has just meant so much to me, and I'm just so grateful for it. I truly am thankful for every single breath, because I remember so many that she wasn't able to take, and I remember all the blood transfusions, and I remember all the tubes and all the medicines, and all the DNRs. I remember all the different things that they had to do and they had to talk to us with. And I remember the sitting down and talking about different options and that kind of thing, and surgeries and all that kind of stuff. And I'm just so grateful for every second of everything, because we never know how many times we're going to need to take it by the second, because some days it was second by second that I needed it to take life, and then there was other days there was minute by minute. And then I remember every once in a while getting a couple hours, and then I remember days, like just hours turning into days, and then sometimes it'd jump back, but I'd remind myself that those times, all meant something that was working towards good. So how can you not just appreciate those? But that is our story, my story, when our daughter was in the NICU, and I can't thank God enough for every second and every breath, and learning and watching with her, watching her learn literally to suck, swallow, breathe, to just every single breath, and every single movement, and her eye open. And it was just such an incredible journey, and it's not one that I hope that anyone has to go on. But if you do have to go on it, or you have been on it, there are so many before me, but I was there and I went on it, and you're not alone. And I feel like when I was going through it, there's only a few people. Social media really wasn't a thing. And since then, I've been able to use social media in a few different ways of, like, when I talk about her throughout the years, when there's like NICU Awareness Month and, Prematurity Awareness Day and, her birthday and her coming home day. And when I've posted things, a couple people have reached out, more than a couple, quite a few people have reached out over the years, and I've been able to talk with them, and either when they're going through it or they've gone through it recently or even in, years ago. And it's just such a gift to be able to give back. And, it's incredible. And you women, you dads, grandmas, grandpas, aunts, uncles, whomever is the one, there for that child and was there for that birth. You are incredible, and I can't commend you enough for what you've gone through, what you're going through. And although we're all glad that our group is small and we wish that no one had to go through it, I am very grateful to be able to help, even in the tiniest way, with others. And that's something I'm really, really passionate about. I'm passionate about that life of that mom, that life of that baby or babies, There are so many stories that go through the NICU. It's not just micropreemies by any means or preemies. We saw so many people and we got to know so many people. And, there's so many stories that were so much more upsetting, tragic, honestly, than ours. Ours had a great outcome. It had the best possible case scenario. She's home. She's 16. She's absolutely amazing. She's just the most kind and genuine and caring and loving and wonderful person you could ever ask for or hope to meet or hope to know. And she's intelligent and she's just sweet and just the best personality. And, I just couldn't be more thankful for our outcome. But I've met so many people that, that's not the case. Their kids go home, or often case they don't go home. And I don't know why God ever chose me to be this amazing girl's mom, but I couldn't thank him enough for it. So that's where I'm going to end this one. And, I'll put some pictures in that are, more recent as well and all. But I just wanted to share our story. And if you have any questions, to put them in the comments, message me, whatever. I'll check them. I check everything pretty consistently, at least. And, yeah. So, again, Kaylin, happy coming home day. We love you so very much, and I love you more than I could ever tell you, and I just don't want you to ever forget that. And I'm so proud of your story. I'm so proud of the woman that you are becoming, and I love you. Then just be grateful for it and appreciate it. Enjoy that smile. and know that you never know what the day may bring. And my life is definitely proof of that.